There is a cruel, unspoken truth that humanity has spent millennia trying to ignore. The universe does not care about you. It does not acknowledge your struggles, your victories, or your suffering. The stars burn with the same intensity, whether you are alive or dead. Galaxies collide, black holes consume entire systems, and time stretches infinitely forward, indifferent to your existence. And yet, we convince ourselves that we matter, that our lives hold some profound significance. In a cosmos that neither notices nor requires our presence, the human mind is not built to accept insignificance. We craft stories, religions, and philosophies to shield ourselves from the horror of meaninglessness. But if we strip away these illusions, we are left with a terrifying reality. Our existence is an accident, a brief flicker in the vast, uncaring expanse of the cosmos. Carl Sagan once said, "We are like butterflies who flutter for a day and think it is forever. We cling to the illusion of permanence, even as time relentlessly proves us wrong." Friedrich Nietzsche recognized this abyss and warned against the dangers of facing it unprepared. To stare too long into the void without a strong foundation is to risk nihilism, the belief that nothing truly matters. And nihilism in its rawest form is not freedom, it is despair. If life has no inherent meaning, then what stops us from surrendering to chaos? Why build? Why love? Why strive for anything when, in the grand scheme, it is all dust? Yet, here's the paradox. Though the universe does not care, we do. And that, in itself, is where the first crack of light emerges in this overwhelming darkness. Albert Camus, in his concept of the absurd, argued that the human condition is defined by the conflict between our desire for meaning and the universe's silence. We cry out for answers, but the cosmos remains mute. And yet, Camus insisted that acknowledging this absurdity does not mean surrendering to it. Instead, it presents a challenge to create meaning despite its absence. The terrifying beauty of existence is that it is wholly ours to define. The universe imposes nothing upon us. It is we who must choose. And so, the real question is not whether life has meaning, but whether you have the courage to create it. What is it that drives us forward? Success? Love? Recognition? Happiness? We chase these things relentlessly, as if they will offer us some final, undeniable proof that our lives are worthwhile. But take a step back, detach yourself from the illusion for a moment, and you will see the absurdity of it all. The empires we build crumble. The wealth we accumulate becomes dust. The legacies we leave behind are eventually forgotten, swallowed by the same time that erases all things. If meaning existed objectively, wouldn't it endure beyond us? Wouldn't it be untouched by death? Consider ambition. People dedicate their entire existence to climbing ladders, corporate, social, intellectual, only to reach the top and ask, is this all there is? Alexander the Great conquered most of the known world, yet when he reached the end of his conquests, he wept. Why? Because there was nothing left to take. His victories, his power, none of it satisfied the fundamental emptiness inside him. And what of the rest of us? The endless pursuit of status, the obsession with success, the desire to be remembered, what does any of it matter when time will inevitably erase our names? Schopenhauer, ever the pessimist, argued that human desire is a curse. The moment we attain what we want, we become restless again, trapped in an endless cycle of striving and dissatisfaction. And when we do not get what we want, we suffer. This is the absurdity of human pursuits. We are doomed to either chase or despair. There is no final satisfaction, no grand resolution where everything falls into place and we rest, content, and fulfilled. Even happiness, that elusive goal, we are conditioned to chase is fleeting. We construct entire lives around the pursuit of pleasure, but happiness is not a permanent state. It is a moment, always slipping through our fingers. And if life were purely about pleasure, then why do so many who seemingly have everything wealth, fame, beauty fall into depression? Why do they self-destruct? The more we have, the more we realize that fulfillment is not something the external world can provide. This is where the absurd reveals itself in full force. We spend our lives running toward something that dissolves the moment we grasp it. We sacrifice our present for an imagined future that never arrives as we expect. And even if we achieve all our dreams, we are left with the unsettling realization that none of it was ever enough. So what then? If all pursuits are futile, if even success does not fulfill us, what is left? The next step in understanding the brutal truth about life is to confront the paradox of meaning itself. If meaning is both an illusion and a necessity, then what does that say about us? If meaning is an illusion, then why do we need it so desperately? Why does the idea of a meaningless life drive people to despair, while the mere belief in purpose, even a fabricated one, can sustain them through unimaginable suffering? This is the paradox. Meaning does not exist independently, yet we cannot live without it. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that humans are condemned to be free. Unlike a rock, a tree, or an animal, we are not bound by a fixed essence. We must define ourselves. But this freedom is both liberating and terrifying. Without a preordained purpose, we are responsible for constructing our own, and that weight can be unbearable. Some find solace in religion, others in ideology, some in ambition, and others in love. But all of these are choices, not inherent truths. This is the fundamental absurdity of human existence. We seek something that does not exist, yet we must act as if it does. Take Viktor Frankl's experience in Nazi concentration camps. Stripped of everything, his family, his career, his dignity, he discovered that the prisoners who survived were not necessarily the strongest or the healthiest, but those who found a reason to keep going. Some clung to faith, others to the hope of seeing their loved ones again. For Frankl, it was the idea that his suffering could be transformed into meaning that he could endure so that one day he could share what he had learned. His book, Man's Search for Meaning, became a testament to this paradox. Meaning is a construct, but without it, we perish. This is why nihilism, in its purest form, is a dead end. To accept that life has no inherent meaning and stop there is to resign oneself to despair. But to recognize the void and then choose to create meaning despite it, that is where true freedom lies. Camus described this as revolting against the absurd. If the universe gives us nothing, then we must take it upon ourselves to create something. Not because it is objectively true, but because it is subjectively necessary. We see this need for meaning everywhere. A person who loses everything, status, wealth, relationships, often loses themselves as well. Why? Because their identity was built upon those things. If a person has no purpose, no framework to justify their existence, they collapse into existential dread. The mind resists the idea that life is just an aimless sequence of events leading to oblivion. It demands significance, even in the face of an indifferent cosmos. So here lies the final question. If meaning is something we must invent, how do we do it in a way that makes life worth living? If there is no external guide, no cosmic blueprint, then how do we forge a path that is not just another illusion waiting to shatter? If the universe does not provide meaning, and if all pursuits are ultimately fleeting, then what is left? The answer is both terrifying and liberating. We must create meaning for ourselves not because it is inherently true, but because it is the only way to live without succumbing to despair. Albert Camus, in The Myth of Sisyphus, presents us with the ultimate symbol of absurdity, a man condemned to push a boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down for eternity. If life has no predetermined purpose, then we are all Sisyphus, endlessly pushing forward, knowing that in the grand scheme, our efforts amount to nothing. And yet, Camus challenges us with a radical idea. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because his task has meaning in a cosmic sense, but because he embraces the struggle itself. This is where most people misunderstand nihilism. True nihilism is not about abandoning life, it is about rejecting imposed illusions and embracing the freedom that comes with it. If there is no grand meaning, then we are free to create our own, not as an escape from the absurd, but as an act of defiance against it. This is not self-deception. It is self-determination. But how do we do this? How do we forge meaning without falling into the trap of illusions that will ultimately shatter? The answer lies in engagement, creation, and experience. 1. Embracing the present instead of chasing an imagined future where meaning will suddenly reveal itself. We must root ourselves in the now. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, the love of fate, urges us to not just accept life, but to embrace it fully, its beauty, its suffering, its uncertainty. If we cannot find meaning in the moment, we will never find it anywhere. 2. Creating, not consuming. The world is filled with distractions, endless entertainment, social validation, artificial goals that keep us occupied but empty. True meaning is not found in passive consumption, but in creation. Whether it's art, philosophy, relationships, or personal growth, what we build with intention is what gives us purpose. 3. Choosing our struggles. Life is suffering, as Buddhism and existential philosophy both recognize. But the difference between a meaningful life and an empty one is whether we choose our struggles or let them be imposed upon us. If we must push a boulder, let it be one we have chosen. 4. Accepting the absurd and defying it. The final step is to accept that meaning is our own invention, but instead of being paralyzed by this fact, we must revel in it. The universe does not care, and that is our greatest gift. We are free to define ourselves in any way we choose. We do not need permission to live fully. The brutal truth is that life has no inherent meaning. But the deeper truth is that this is precisely what gives us the power to create one. Meaning is not something to be found, it is something to be made. The real question is, will you take responsibility for crafting yours, or will you let the void consume you?